Okay, welcome to our Cloud Builders Meetup. Thanks everybody for turning up. On the theme of some of the foundational stuff on cloud, last time we had identity as a topic. Tonight we've got security as a topic. So security incident response at AWS specifically. And we're very lucky tonight to have John Martinez, who's the Principal Solutions Architect at Evident.io. He's a recognized DevOps leader in the industry and helps customers engage security as part of their continuous deployment and integration strategies. He's managed cloud infrastructure team at Adobe prior to joining Evident.io and was a seasoned engineer at Netflix before Adobe. He's also sat on the customer advisory board of AWS up until recently, where he helped guide the future of AWS services. So let me hand it over to John Martinez. Thank you.
How you guys doing tonight?
Good.
I'm going to ask that you guys please sit forward more. I want to make this session as interactive as possible. Talking about incident response is one of those things where there's no embarrassing questions, no judgment, none of that kind of stuff. So definitely please ask away. All right. So tonight we're going to talk about what it is or how to manage an incident in AWS. I'm going to ask it flat out. You don't have to raise your hand, but you can. How many here have actually had a security incident where you've been compromised on AWS? I'll raise my hand. Right? It wasn't fun, right? It was a lot of work. There's a lot of different ways that you can get compromised in Amazon. We'll talk a little bit about some of those things. Really what we're going to dive into is how, not so much what to do after you've been, although we'll talk about that, but mostly how to prepare for an incident, right? Because a security incident is not one where it's an if, it's a when. When is it going to happen to you? When is that access key going to get compromised, and you're going to get some weird instances pop up in places you didn't think that they would pop up. So we're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about what you're responsible for in prepping for an incident response plan and strategy. But we'll also talk about what AWS is looking from you. There's actually a good partnership between you and AWS on incident response. Then we're going to dive into sort of a lot of the preventative best practices and what you can do and what happens if you don't practice some of these things. And then we'll touch a little bit on, I promise not to be too salesy for the company I work for, but touch a little bit about how we can help there. Like Danny was saying, I'm an old Unix and Linux geek from way back when, as somebody here will attest to that. I've been hacking for a really, really long time. More recently, I actually worked, right before this job, I worked at Adobe. I was part of the cloud operations team over there, where we architected, we built, we secured AWS for the Creative Cloud. So that was our primary project that we worked on. As a matter of fact, the founders of the company that I work for now come from Adobe as well. So we have some pretty good experience with not just building AWS at a really large scale, but also securing it at a really large scale, which can be kind of a crazy thing when you have hundreds of AWS accounts. What's Evident.io? In essence, we're a security analysis and threat analysis company. We work strictly on AWS only, and we expose a lot of that. Again, I promise not to be too salesy, but we are in cloud security. That's our specialty. All right, security incident. What's a security incident? Usually it's something that is crisis, right? If you are either a security engineer or if you're an operations engineer, you'll know that you'll get called at 3 in the morning because either Amazon sent you an email that said, hey, your instance is being used as an attack vector for a whole bunch of other stuff over here. You know, an EC2 instance is scanning a bunch of ports on some other customer infrastructure, and so that's one possibility. It could be another possibility that you know, somebody tweeted about something. Hey, you know, I got some juicy bits on Adobe. I've got some juicy bits on Autodesk. You know, then you come and check it out over here. And somebody found out, and you know, you get a call at 3 in the morning. But basically, it's when one type of incident would be, you know, where an EC2 instance got compromised, keys got compromised, so things are disappearing, and auto scaling is going out all crazy. So that's another. So it's really important to recognize a lot of the effects of what a compromise could be, right? And so sometimes AWS will help you out there, sometimes they won't. Sometimes you'll have to figure it out on your own. But what is clear, and I'm going to ask the question, is how many of you are familiar with the shared security responsibility model that AWS has, right? You know, they're responsible for securing the physical layer all the way up to the API endpoint, right? And it's your responsibility to secure it from the point where you get the access key all the way to deploying your infrastructure in AWS. So if you know that part of it, right, you'll know that it's your responsibility to secure the keys to the kingdom. You know, Amazon, again, will help you out quite a bit. They will. You know, in a lot of cases we've heard where people have acquired I guess I'll use the word acquired. They've acquired a $50,000 monthly bill because of instances that have gotten generated or started up because of a compromised key. They'll help you out. That's the bottom line, is they'll help you out. But you have to be very proactive, and I'll talk a little bit later on what that looks like. But you know, what can I do to prepare for a crisis, right? What can I do to prepare for the things that keep me up at night? You know, the bad people that are out there. So, what should I do? We like to use the first aid analogy for an incident response, right? What are the types of things that I should do? Number one, I have to evaluate what's going on, right? I have to go around and do the thing that needs to get done to stop the bleeding. You know, if it's a compromised access key, then I need to go and rotate that key right away. You know, I need to go stop the bleeding. I need to go secure the site, isolate what's going on, right? I need to like make sure that I can stop it. So first of all, if you're in an incident response meeting, you've been called, you know, you have to kind of get the lay of the land, what's going on. A lot of times, and this is where sort of, you know, kind of fingerprinting your environment or having a good sort of stamping, templating of your environment comes into play, right? How many of you, for example, are using CloudFormation as an example, right? CloudFormation is a great tool. It's a great service that Amazon has for me to template my environments. You know, I can build everything from VPCs all the way up to the application stack to deploy my applications, right? So CloudFormation is one of those services that really can save my bacon, right? You know, when it comes down to it, because I can sort of easily tell that, hey, these instances over here don't match the tagging standard that I have for my CloudFormation stacks. You know? So those aren't being managed by auto-scaling, for example. So easy, stop the bleeding. And then the next thing to do is to relax, calm down a little bit, you know, start breathing. You know, you don't want to go into shock, right? You know, and if you have a well-formulated response plan, this usually kicks in. There's some, you know, an incident manager usually that's on a call, and they kind of bring everything under control, kind of make sure we're doing the right things. Just out of show of hands, how many of you are practicing, you have an incident plan for when something happens on AWS? Right. Well, good. Not everybody does. A lot of people don't. A lot of people won't even know that they've been compromised for months. You know, I know one situation we had at Adobe, we had, and you know, this only happens at Adobe, right, by the way, it doesn't happen anywhere else. But we've had where a developer decides to, as part of their job, they decide to open up an AWS account, right? They put it on their credit card, they sign up for it. And they go do some tests and stuff. Well, 6 months later, I get a call at 2 in the morning saying that we've got that Amazon called us and we've got a Bitcoin mining botnet happening over in Singapore in one of our AWS accounts. And turns out that it was an instance that got started up and forgotten about. It was a dev instance, and interestingly enough, there was some juicy stuff there. Wide open, vulnerable application, web application. And one of the things people were able to get was the access key to that account. And this access key happened to belong to the root user. How many of you guys are still using the root user access keys? Hopefully not, right? One of the best practices, I'll talk about that, right? Well, with the root user access key, you basically have access to the entire AWS account. There's no type of IAM policy that you can use to restrict any of the services or any of the permissions that user has. So as part of that, we found out the hard way that having better governance on some of those dev environments was what was needed. We happened to be called, and by the time we knew it, fortunately for us, it didn't cost us all that much more than just having the embarrassment of doing a lot of Bitcoin mining for some people. But it's what happened. We were able to relax, to kind of take a look, and okay, it didn't happen on the main Creative Cloud accounts. It happened in just an isolated development environment. So the damage could have been much worse, but that's what it was, right? But all that to say that we can't ignore. We have a lot of really good controls, a lot of really good guardrails on our production environments, but we can't ignore development environments. That's one of the lessons we learned there. So start breathing. Let's get business running again. Let's get the website back up. Let's get the web application back up and running. Let's put a bumper page if that's what it takes, right? It depends on the situation, right? Is your database compromised as well? Is there any data loss, etc.? So start breathing, start gaining control. Protect the wound. This is where we start investigating root cause. This is where we start looking into what was the cause of this. A lot of times, this is in the example that I gave, this is the part of the incident where we were able to determine that an incident was compromised. And a lot of that Amazon had already told us because they already had an instance ID. We were just scrambling to get back on the instance. In fact, I think the biggest thing we were struggling with was to find the engineer who had the SSH key, the private SSH key to get into that instance. So that was the biggest thing that we were trying to do when we were scrambling the jets to get back into that instance. And then finally, one of the other things to do is to treat for shock. Basically, make it better so that it doesn't happen again. This is kind of, the post-mortem type of situation, right? What can I do to make it better? In those days, there really wasn't. We didn't have IAM roles at our disposal, so we came up with a really what we thought at the time was a really good plan for rotating access keys and managing access keys, etc. So even though it was a small incident in the grand scheme of things, it really helped change a lot of what we were doing in terms of incident response and the plan for incidents. Any questions at all on anything so far? All right. So I'm going to get into a couple of checklists here. First one is, again, did I lose you guys? No, there it is. First of all, getting into the shared responsibility model in AWS, it's you. What can you do to make things better? So what are you responsible to AWS to have in an incident, right? Obviously you can let it go for a really long time, and you can ignore the email from Amazon, but then your Amazon account's going to get turned off. They're just going to, you're done. They're going to terminate your instances, and if it's a production environment, you obviously don't want to do that. So you should have a plan. You should have a plan and a set of tools. There's many different tools out there. Definitely in the area of forensics, if for example you're going to be asked for the image of a particular running instance, EC2 instance, you're going to want to have certain tools at your disposal to be able to take those forensics. In our case, what we did a lot of was what we came out with what we called our internal CloudFormation toolkit for incident response. So we had an actual forensics CloudFormation template where we would cordon off a certain section, we'd create a new VPC, we'd cordon off a section of the VPC, not allow outbound internet traffic, and literally we'd create an AMI of the affected instance and then start it up in that isolated environment. That allowed us to kind of see what was going on in that instance, depending on the situation again, right? You know, if that's what you were after, definitely you want to do that. You definitely want to define what is happening and when it happened. That's a little bit harder to do. You know, thankfully today we've got CloudTrail at our disposal, and we're going to talk. I have a bullet point there, a little bit down. You know, where you have an activity log actually of what's going on, API data, API activity, right? So you can tell what happened when, or who did what when, what API access key happened, you know, and was used for certain events, right? So you definitely have that access to that data now. A lot of times too, and we'll get into what it looks like from an AWS perspective, but a lot of times if there's something that's not exposed by a CloudTrail, definitely use your support contract. How many people here have a support contract on Amazon? How many people use it? I use it all the time, right? It's a great thing, you're paying for it, might as well start using it, right? Definitely in a security response situation, you definitely want to get Amazon involved. Usually they already are. The security team's already contacted you about something. But definitely, if there's a particular piece of activity that isn't logged by CloudTrail, for example, it could be the firewall logs to a security group. You know, there's a lot of times where Amazon can help you out with a lot of that stuff. Of course, you got to remember that Amazon is dealing with, you know, probably, you know, zettabytes and zettabytes of data, of firewall log data, right? So it's going to be really hard to pinpoint the needle in the haystack, but they can definitely look for you on your behalf, you know, and help you out there. Define what and when was not happening. It's kind of the anti-pattern of what is happening, right? What is not happening? You know, you have to kind of weed out, you know, especially when you have, again, at 2, 3 in the morning, you're in freak out mode, right? You're freaked out, you don't know what's going on. You definitely want to make sure that you don't freak out on something that isn't happening. You know, the ELB looks okay. This autoscale group over here looks okay. Your RDS databases are fine, you know, nothing's happening there. So you definitely want to weed out what's happening from what's not happening. And that's sometimes a lot harder to determine, right, than what is happening. Because you don't know, you know, you're freaked out, you think that the entire account is compromised. So it leads into definitely that you want to triage the problem. You definitely want to get in there and get as much detail as you can. The more detail you can collect, the better. Definitely if this was sort of what I would rate in the realm of an internal threat, you know, that kind of sounds like a very bad thing, but internal threats are not necessarily bad actors, right? Internal threats could be that, hey man, you know, I accidentally, unfortunately, posted the application log on an S3 bucket that's world readable, but it happened to have an API access key in there. Sorry, man. You know, it could be that. That's an internal threat. That's not malicious, but it happened, right? It definitely happened. So you want to be able to collect not just the black and white log data that you can get to, but also kind of the people log data, right? You know, kind of check out, you know, ask around what's going on, what happened, was there a deploy today, what's different about today's deploy than yesterday's, you know, and that kind of stuff. So you definitely want to get as much information there as you can. Scale up, scale out to help isolate the issue, right? This is kind of more dampening. We'll talk about a little bit about it later, but I'll touch on it now. Definitely use auto-scaling at your disposal. You have auto-scaling. You have the ability to dampen the effects of some of these compromises by using auto-scaling in a lot of places. Doesn't make sense everywhere, but you can definitely If there's a DDoS attack, for example, you can certainly dampen some of those effects by using autoscaling, starting more instances to make sure that the product is up and running, that things are going okay, and you can definitely do a lot of that. You can definitely do a lot of the scaling. Definitely use it. Logs, 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 logs. This goes in on the forensic side. CloudTrail. How many of you are not using CloudTrail? Okay, good. So for sure, you want to have that there. Even if you don't look through it every day, it's an insurance policy, right? It's an insurance policy for when you want to go take a look at. And you definitely want to have that there. But you definitely do want to go through there every once in a while and check it out. S3 logs. How many people are not using S3 logs or S3 buckets, right? Kind of yet another thing, right? You definitely want to, it can be gigabytes and gigabytes of data to weed through, but really good to have, really good to have, so you can kind of go back and have those data points. ELB logs, kind of the hidden gem of the logging world in AWS, the data plane in AWS. ELB logs are great too, because that allows you to look through what activity is happening at the application layer, right? Because a lot of, you're using ELBs to funnel traffic through from the outside to your EC2 instances, so it's really good to have. Host logs as well, goes without saying. Snapshot of affected resources, right? What's the state of infrastructure? Has anybody not heard about the AWS config service so far? So, great service to have. You definitely have snapshot views of your infrastructure at a point in time. So really good to have a snapshot. Again, I'll go back to something like CloudFormation or even code-driven deployments, where you have your own scripts. You might have Jenkins to do the builds and to deploy builds. Chef, you might have Chef or Puppet. Those are all really good things to have, so you can have kind of those reference templates that you can go back to and start things up. So you definitely want to have those snapshots. And finally, what I recommend to everybody, again, open a support case with AWS early. Definitely do that as one of the first things. We actually had a, not so much a security incident, but just a general incident response team at Adobe that it was their sole job to make sure that they opened up an AWS support ticket when there was an incident of any kind, that they were tracking the ticket, so that made sure that they were calling the right support people, they were calling our technical account manager, they were doing all the right things to make sure that everything is tracked, everything is good. And update often. You definitely want to have, if you have the right level of support, you will definitely have an AWS TAM there on your call if you want, and they'll be able to help you out, but you definitely have to keep them in the loop as to what's going on, for sure. Update your cases and give them as much information as possible so that they can help you out. All right. What does it look like from the AWS perspective? This is a good list that actually was compiled by one of my colleagues and actually an ex-AWS technical account manager who definitely has gone through a lot more stuff than I have in terms of really hairy incidents over in Amazon. And I asked them, so what does Amazon look for when it comes to incidents, right? Specifically security incidents. What did you guys look for, and what did you guys expect your customers to have? So there's a couple of things that Amazon will do with you. They definitely won't do for you. This is stuff that you have to be okay with. You have to say, okay, give them the big thumbs up and say, go ahead and do that, because they won't necessarily do it for you on your behalf. But definitely communicate. Communicate via support ticket. This is one that was really, really hard for me as a customer, right? I was, in a previous life, I had done enterprise sysadmin work, and we were used to in that world, to basically, you're the support team, you take care of all this stuff, right? Why do I have to do that? Well, Amazon doesn't really work that way with you. You definitely want to have all of those communication pieces logged in the ticket with them. Sometimes you might have a TAM that's more willing to do stuff with you, but you definitely want to support, you want to engage support via a ticket first. Nature, when something is happening really bad, is not to do that, right? It's just to lob every request at the poor support engineer at the TAM and say, go do this, go do that. But you definitely want to go log. Again, we had this incident response team, that was their job, right? You know, as we were doing things in the actual incident, they would go and log things into the AWS ticket. So, but you definitely want to communicate with them via the support ticket. They can provide you with guidance on scaling up. They'll definitely work with you there. So if you need to start up a bunch of instances, they can help you out with that. They can help you out with scaling out. You know, there's some lessons here that we learned, some really hard lessons here, especially with DDoS attacks that we have pretty much on a daily basis. They actually work with us on telling us that, hey, you know, your ELB just went from 50 instances to 100 instances because we noticed that there was a little bit of a tick in traffic coming into that ELB. So they will do stuff like that to help you out, to kind of dampen the effects. And you know, scaling an ELB is not something that you can do today anyway, but they can definitely help you out with that. They can also help isolate the issue. You know, they have access to much more logs than we do. They have access to different AWS console than we're used to, right? So again, you know, this is stuff that they can give you guidance on. Very little use thing, but definitely something that they can do sometimes is to shift traffic. Again, this kind of goes with the ELB scenario that I was talking about. Sometimes they can help you shift traffic from a particular affected availability zone to another one. They might help you out with that, and they certainly can. And they've done that actually on several occasions. And last but not least, they can help you provide a forensic image so that you can go analyze. A lot of times if you've lost access to your account, you may not have access to creating an AMI from a particular EBS volume anymore, or a snapshot of an EBS volume, right? It really depends on the situation, but they can certainly help you out with that. You know, they might not be able to help you out with the data that's on there if it was an encrypted volume, for example, but they can certainly help you out in certain areas where you've lost control of your AWS accounts. Any questions on the checklist at all? I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit here, but this is our, yeah.
What do you mean by scaling out?
Can you, would you mind like talking to the microphone? Sorry.
What do you mean by scaling out?
So what do I mean by scaling out? So this could be either scaling out EC2 instances to dampen the effects of a DDoS attack. So for example, like they can help you with guidance on, well, you know, if you have an auto-scaling group, you know, we think that based on this attack, you should go to N number of instances, for example. In the case that I was talking about the ELB, only they can scale the ELB in that case, right? So they can definitely give you guidance on, hey, you know, your ELB is of a certain size, if you knew or not, and we think that you should go to these many ELB instances behind the scene to help dampen the effect. So, does that answer the question?
Yeah, so for DOS attacks.
It's mostly for DDoS attacks, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah?
You said that Amazon can help you provide the, get the forensic image? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
So you said Amazon can help you with the forensic image. Will they actually make the forensic image for you if that's not available to you, or how can they help with that?
Yeah. So in some cases where, for example, I can say that when we've lost control of the AWS account, they actually created an EBS snapshot for us. It's kind of a very special type of situation that they don't really like to do at all, but it's happened for us before in the past.
Okay, so they'll create.
Sorry. Yeah.
They'll create this snapshot for you, and then you can forensic image it with DD or something?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. Yeah, it happened in the situation I was talking about earlier. In that case, that's exactly what happened for us. They actually did create the snapshot for us because we had lost access to the access key. the root access key, and they basically had destroyed all the IAM users. So we couldn't get back into the account. Yeah.
Have you seen cases of security incidents against resources other than EC2?
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually seen one on S3 before, definitely. It was one of those things where we didn't see any kind of loss in performance out of our bucket or anything like that. If you think about how Creative Cloud works, it's basically petabytes and petabytes of customer data, right? So it was kind of more of a hey, we thought you should know that that we've actually gone and repartitioned your S3 bucket because this was happening. Some DDoS attack was happening against that particular bucket. But it was mainly around denial of service. It wasn't really around compromise of a bucket or anything like that. But rare that haven't really seen a whole lot of attacks on things like SQS or SNS or some of those kind of ancillary services. But
Or RDS, anything like that?
RDS for sure. Just from a general, it's a nuance from EC2, right? It's mainly around open security groups and things like that, or a misconfigured VPC usually, where it was kind of not intended for the RDS database to be in the public subnets, and they just got deployed that way. Kind of ignored our architecture.
For forensics on that, is logs the main kind of communication?
Yeah. But yeah, for RDS for sure. Yeah, because they're not going to give you an image snapshot of those RDS instances. Cool. Any other questions? All right. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about those 10 AWS best practices. Now, these are things that we've experienced mainly from both from our experience at Adobe and from talking to some of our customers now. Kind of what's happening out there. So I'm going to go through them, and I'm actually going to kind of talk about each one in detail. We're actually going through a blog series on these now. That's why I put the blog URL there. So if you're curious about reading about a lot of these in detail, we definitely have a lot of good information there about what they are and what kind of things it'll buy you. These are a lot of sort of, if you've seen some of these, it's going to be kind of a rehash for you, but definitely good to talk about nonetheless. Disable root API access key and secret key. Now, I touched on this a little bit. Definitely one of those practices where a root key can be used for pretty much anything. It's got God mode access into your AWS account. Even AWS doesn't generate API access keys for the root account anymore. So what is a root account? Is everybody sort of aware of what the root account is versus like an IAM user, right? So first things first, right? Definitely go and disable root API access keys on any root accounts that you still have. For sure, take them away. The other thing too is to do that, you definitely have to prepare for certain things. Like for example, what do I mean by that? So in order for you to do that, you have to set up some billing access to IAM users. If you're using any kind of either billing SaaS platform, like for example, like a Cloudability, for example, if you're using something like that, you're definitely already set up with IAM access for billing data. But it's definitely something that gets you along the way to get there. Another thing that you have to set up is your contact list. How many of you guys know what I'm talking about in the AWS account contact list, right? Very important, right? One of the contacts there is a security contact, right? This is where you can separate out your billing contact, kind of like when you register a domain, right? You separate the billing contact from the technical contact from the security contact, right? So you can definitely set it up. So you can set it up at security@company.com or whatever, so that security incident emails like the one I was talking about earlier get sent to the right place. So for sure, definitely disable the root API access key everywhere. Don't just rotate the keys, actually go and disable it. One practice that we actually do preach to our customers is not only to disable your root API access keys, but actually disable access to the root account in general. So, what's a scenario that I can go through there? At this point, and I haven't looked whether data export import works with an IAM user anymore, but because I haven't used data import and export in a really long time. But for sure, one of the practices that we recommend, one of the things that we started going down the road at Adobe was to actually disable access to accounts in general. Like what we do is we'd set up a virtual MFA token on an account, set up a password, and then actually go and break the virtual MFA token, so we can no longer log into the account. That sounds kind of scary to do, but it actually works. And if you need to get back into the AWS account for whatever reason, it's usually a 15-minute call, depending again with the right level of support, to AWS support, and you're back into the root user. They'll do a password reset, an MFA disable. So that's something that we practiced. It was very scary at first, but it's something that eventually worked out really well, because now not only can we not get into the root accounts, neither can other people not get into the root accounts. So definitely that's another thing to look at there. Enable MFA tokens everywhere. This goes without saying, right? Definitely want to do that. For sure on your IAM users. And certainly it's one of those things, it's not one of our top 10, but it kind of goes along with this. If you're one of those shops that have SSO, for example, you definitely want to look into investing in setting up identity federation, for example, and use your corporate identities to get into your AWS accounts. But for sure, you definitely want to enable MFA tokens everywhere. One of the things I actually have a Meetup slide deck that I did at a Meetup in LA a few months ago, where I actually proposed that having MFA enabled on at the API at the command line was a good thing too. So I call that presentation the sadistic SecOps manager. Because definitely not a popular thing to propose to developers, right? They don't want to be challenged when they're on their laptops. But for sure, I definitely I recommend that you check that slide deck out. I have a blog post about it as well. But it's something to think about. It's something you can do. You can definitely require MFA at the command line if that's what you wanted to go for. Third thing is. Reduce the number of IAM users with admin rights. This is actually, to the point of the incident that I was talking about earlier, definitely one of those places where you can have some pretty bad things happen, quote unquote, right? If you allow people to have admin rights everywhere. And it's really easy to do, just like with wide open, and that's point number 9, just with wide open security groups, right? It's a really easy thing to do. Just create a user and go and attach the administrator policy to it. It's a really easy thing to do. But I propose that you have a much better thought out practice around creating IAM policies. And today, a couple of weeks ago, right, Amazon announced managed IAM policies, right? So they made it even a lot easier for you to implement your policies across many IAM entities, right? It used to be that, oh man, I have to go create another policy. You had groups, IAM groups. That was kind of one way to centrally manage policies, but now it's really cool that I have these managed policy ARNs that I can go apply to the various IAM entities, right? Has anybody not heard about managed IAM managed policies at this point? Yeah, okay, so I'll get into a little bit. So what a managed IAM policy is, it's they basically decoupled the requirement to create an IAM policy in a particular IAM entity, like a group or a role or a user. So you can now centrally reference a policy, and it's very natural implementation. So just like with anything in IAM, any entity in IAM, there's an ARN associated with that entity. So there's an ARN associated with the policy. So now I can go create a central policy and then go reference and basically point at that particular policy ARM from within the entities that I've created. So roles, for example, you can go and reference it. So it's really cool. I definitely would invest a little bit of time in looking into it. As a matter of fact, if you create any kind of IAM entity today, the default is to attach a managed policy to that entity. So they've kind of made it a little bit hard to attach an inline policy, but you can do it still. And it kind of goes with a little bit with that topic as well. Use roles for EC2. So roles for EC2 are an awesome thing. How many of you are accessing other AWS services from within your EC2 instances? Right? How many of you or your instances are talking to S3 or to SQS or to whatever, right? Chances are that you've deployed an application with an access key in there, right? And now you've got the added benefit that you have to go and do some key management, right? You have to deploy the key to the instance. If you were like me back in the day, you created some really cool cookbooks with Chef, and you figured it out, right? You kind of created this complex web of ways to sort of securely get the access key onto an instance, right? Well, all of that was blown away and made a lot easier when AWS created roles for EC2. So with roles for EC2, I'm now able to actually, behind the scenes, use the security token service to get a temporary authentication token that my applications can go use to talk to AWS services. So really cool. If you're still deploying applications with access keys, I would really encourage you to look at roles. Again, this is one of the big worries. An added bonus, if you're still not convinced to switch over to EC2 roles, is that if you do have a key compromise, or if you're worried that your key was compromised or might be compromised or maybe not, that in our case, like for example, when we had to go rotate keys on our Creative Cloud environments, it was like a 2-hour ordeal, right? It was, so if anything, hopefully it'll save you some operations time in the realm of key management and key rotation, right? Definitely something to take a look at. And what's really cool about it is that you can go apply very specific policies to those roles. So for example, if you have an EC2 instance that all it needs to do is talk to a particular S3 bucket, you can definitely modify and apply a policy to that role that only allows it to do those things. So really cool service. Least privilege. Limit what IAM entities can do with strong and explicit policies. This kind of goes with EC2 roles, but it can also go with the development role. It could go with a deployment role. A lot of times your Jenkins server isn't necessarily running in EC2. It's not necessarily running in a place where you can apply an EC2 role. So you would have to deploy an API access key there, create an IAM user, and do those kind of things that you really don't want to do, but that's just the way it is, right? So definitely in those types of cases, if for example your Jenkins server, all it needs to do is create a CloudFormation stack, limit the policy to only allow that particular IAM user to create a CloudFormation stack. Just CFN create stack. That's all you should have it do, right? You definitely don't want to apply the administrator policy. So it kind of goes with the other points that I made earlier, for sure. Rotate all the keys regularly. This is one that seems kind of old school at this point, but for sure, you definitely want to go do this. You're still going to have IAM users. You're still going to have entities that have keys associated with them. So have a rotation policy. Practice it. Do it once a month, at least. I think once a month is a good practice. Again, aging. You can definitely go in there in the API and go take a look at. Run a report on your IAM entities and go take a look at the aging of your access keys. Use IAM roles with STS to assume role where possible. Again, this is something that you can go and implement. It's a little bit harder to do, but you can definitely go implement on like deployment scripts, where you can have a very limited access key that all it has permission to do is STS assume role. and then go and assume the role that has the much higher level of permission. So again, I recommend that you read my blog post on the sadistic SecOps manager, because that's also the way that I propose that you can apply an MFA on a developer on their laptop and make them unhappy. I've harped on this a little bit already, but use auto-scaling to dampen DDoS effects. This is one that may seem kind of, I don't know, it may seem kind of like you're giving AWS a lot of money for being attacked, it's not your fault. But definitely, it's one where you have to balance out the uptime of your application. This is where the application needs to stay up. It's a critical application. It's your PaaS, so it's got to take a lot of rendering jobs. It's got to take a lot of traffic in from other applications that are dependent on your PaaS. So definitely use auto-scaling everywhere where it makes sense. We certainly had the rule and sort of the philosophy where even if it was a scaling group of one instance, if it was a desired number of one, we implemented a scaling group. So it just made life a lot easier. And if an instance died, you kind of got what I would call, poor man's HA, but I don't really want to call it that. But you definitely had the ability to come in and bring in another instance if an instance died. But at a large scale, you definitely want to apply auto-scaling for scaling out in incidents where you've got DDoS. Goes without saying, don't allow the entire internet to talk to your EC2 instances or your ELBs unless you really need to. That goes without saying, right? As a matter of fact, I would say that if you're taking traffic, especially customer traffic, on an EC2 instance, it's probably a better idea to have it behind an ELB. Why not? It's a little bit nominal traffic charge, but definitely it's going to help you out. You can terminate SSL. There's a lot of benefits for running behind an ELB where possible. But for sure, if you have a web application that's customer accessible, of course you're going to have it world accessible. In some cases too, we had to worry about having access from the bad 5 countries. So there's some interesting things that you might need to do there. With IP spaces and things like that. Definitely, I know a lot about that, and I had to practice a lot of that over at Adobe. So, embargoed countries limitation or something that is probably at the top of a lot of your minds. And how do I protect myself from that? Certainly not with an EC2 or ELB security group, right? So again, unless you really mean to do it, definitely don't allow the entire internet to talk to your stuff. Watch world readable and listable S3 buckets and policies. A lot of times we've really come to the point where we concentrate a lot on EC2, a lot on the web application side of AWS, and we've ignored Amazon's oldest service, right, S3. And there's a lot of great stuff you can do with S3 these days, including running an entire website on it. So definitely in the type of incidents where we had compromise of access keys, and S3 is open S3 buckets are probably right up there with scanning of GitHub repos for access keys. It's right up there. It's very listable. There's a finite namespace, so you definitely have a lot of people cruising through S3 buckets and what kind of juicy stuff can I find here. And sometimes you might find that there's a log file with an access key in it, and that's a bad thing, right? So definitely watch your world readable listable S3 bucket policies. There's one that actually I had forgotten and recently came to us from a customer of ours actually, where they actually had a compromise because they were allowing quote unquote all authenticated users in an ACL on their bucket, right? So that's an interesting permission that we were talking about today, and it was like, yeah, it's kind of one of those permissions where it doesn't really do what you think it does. It's really allowing anybody with a valid access key, whether they should have that access key or not, access to your S3 bucket, right? So in effect, you're basically allowing the world, how many AWS customers does AWS have? They have tons, right? So definitely a permission to watch out for, that goes right along with the world readable and listable S3 bucket policies. I promise not to get very salesy, but Evident.io, we were created to help with a lot of this stuff. So if you have any questions, definitely contact me. I'd be more than happy to have an email exchange with you, have a phone call with you, no problem. It's not a problem at all. We can talk right after this. It's absolutely something that I would love to talk about, passionate about. I'm speaking at Chef Conf in a couple of weeks, so if you're going to be at Chef Conf, would love to see you there at my session. Talking about DevOps and compliance. So if that's something that's interesting, I will be there. So thank you very much. And is there any questions at all from anybody? I know I've gone through this really fast. Yeah.
On your point about the S3, can you speak to using CloudFront in any way to front your S3 ordered bucket?
Yeah, absolutely. CloudFront is definitely a good service to use in front of S3, where you have S3 objects as the origin objects. It's sort of, I would say it's kind of analogous to having an ELB in front of EC2, where it's something to have kind of a proxy layer of sorts to have in front of your actual data. So you can definitely do some different controls on CloudFront that you maybe could in S3. So you could have a very limited S3 bucket policy that only allows CloudFront, for example. So that you can do interesting things like that as well. Does that answer the question?
I think there's only like one thing you can do or something.
Yeah.
Where it allows temporary access or.
Like was it signed URLs?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where it's temporary, and I think there's definitely a caveat with signed URLs too, where once you've actually created the signed URL, you can't really revoke it. So that's something to kind of think about as well. So when you're looking at that, so for example, we definitely went with signed URLs for our publicly created URLs for customer objects, for example. So it's definitely something to keep in mind and work with Amazon on your architecture if you're looking to do that.
Have you seen any solutions around host security or network security that exist in traditional data centers?
Like actually having agents run on the EC2 instances.
Yeah.
There's a bunch out there. There's definitely tools and services like Cloud Passage, for example. Where they actually, it's kind of more of a managed firewall on your EC2 instances, but they could provide you some good forensic data. Because they're actually, they're covering a space where AWS isn't in yet, and that's giving you access to the firewall logs, the security group firewall logs. So that's one thing you could do there. Definitely in the area of FIM, file integrity management, there's some actual activity there. OSEC is kind of the gold standard, but there's a couple of commercial options as well. Anything else? Any other questions?
On the parameter, have you seen anything on the parameter side?
Not really, because that's in the realm of the AWS side of the shared responsibility model, right? They don't allow you to really inject they don't allow you at all to inject, any kind of device, inside of their network, right? So that's really up to where I would recommend highly to work with the AWS team, that works with you, making sure that you're comfortable with Amazon having the right level of controls. And if you've gone through like SOC 2 or ISO 27001, I highly recommend that you look at their SOC 2 report, their ISO reports, and engage AWS that way, because there's a lot of stuff in there and a lot of best practices in there that you definitely want to take a look at. And it kind of assuages you. It's under NDA, so I can't really get into it too deeply, but definitely, if you're you're a customer of theirs that has that level of access to NDA information, I definitely highly recommend that you go take a look at some of that.
Kind of a wild question, but Do you feel that hypervisor vulnerabilities are being exploited right now in public clouds?
People are certainly trying, for sure. Yeah, it's kind of like, it kind of goes back, I think when I first was introduced to EC2 about 5 years ago, one of the things that we were trying to do really, really hard was to gain access to the underlying storage. You know, back then it was instant store, that was, there was no EBS yet. So we were definitely trying to look for ways to get access to, either some kind of file bits that were maybe lingering around. We weren't successful at it. The place I was talking about was when I worked at Netflix. We were trying really hard because that was one of the concerns, was that somebody can go read our data. But for sure, definitely people are going to be trying to access the control layer of Zen, the hypervisor layer, whether they can crack into a DOM or not. I haven't really seen it yet, but maybe it's happened. I don't know. Nah, Amazon, I don't think has come out. Any other questions? So thank you very much. I don't know, you want to come up and a little bit about?
Did you gave you're hiring?
We are hiring, absolutely.
Of course.
Definitely, absolutely. Send me an email. If you're interested in working what I call the best cloud security startup in the world, definitely send me an email.
John, thank you very much.
Oh.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Hit the next slide, because we're also hiring here at Autodesk for the Autodesk Cloud, and interestingly, there's a lot of different groups hiring, but Cloud Ops is a team name even on our side too. So if you have any questions about Autodesk or hiring, etc., there's a table on the back where you register that has information there. So thank you everyone for coming. Please stay in touch with our meetup, and we have another meeting coming up in April. Thanks a lot.
ठीक है इतना I mean, I've already gone through that book. It's not so long as you consider it. What you said.